The unwanted GF Turin moved through the dry valley with slow steps and quiet breath as the heat rose from the ground in waves and the wind carried dust across the cracked stones that stretched far in all directions. The sky above held no clouds and no mercy as his boots pushed through loose sand and his eyes scanned the horizon for signs of movement. He was not hunting and he was not searching for food, but his eyes were sharp from years of being alone on the edge of the tribe's land. He had no family, no friends, no name that anyone called with warmth, and he had learned not to expect kindness from the people who lived behind the wooden walls of the settlement. Still, he did not hate them, and he did not blame them for their cold glances or whispered warnings because he was different, and they feared what they did not understand on this day. Something strange caught his eye beneath a crooked ridge where shade touched a shallow pool of muddy water. There lay a creature small and still, with thin limbs and skin marked by scratches and bruises. Its eyes were closed, and its breathing faint as if the desert had almost swallowed it whole. Rin stepped closer with careful motion and crouched beside it, without fear because he saw no threat in this small broken thing. He reached out and placed his hand near its head and felt the weak pull of its breath, like a dying ember trying to stay alive. He could have walked away and left it to the heat and the scavengers, but something in its shape reminded him of himself, unwanted, ignored, strange, and forgotten. So he took it gently in his arms, wrapped it in his scarf, and began the long walk back to his hut at the edge of the village. When he arrived, the children saw him carrying it and laughed, calling it ugly and useless. One of the older boys threw a stone and said no one should bring wild things into the village. Rin ignored them and entered his hut, where silence waited for him like a loyal shadow inside. He placed the creature on a cloth and cleaned its wounds using water he had saved for drinking. He crushed herbs he had learned to gather from the old forest path and placed them on the injuries with slow, patient hands. For 3 days the creature did not wake, and Rin stayed beside it through night and day, feeding it drops of water and warm broth. On the 4th morning, its eyes opened, not fully and not bright, but open. They were unlike any eyes he had seen, clear and sharp yet calm, like a lake before a storm. It looked at him not with fear and not with hunger, but with something else, recognition. Rin smiled, though no one saw it, and whispered a name he had kept in his mind since the first moment he saw it. He called it Karu. Karu was weak and small, but its spirit was not broken. Each day it grew stronger, moving its legs and lifting its head, watching everything around it. Rin spoke to it, not in words meant for humans, but in soft sounds and quiet tones. Karu listened and learned it in the evenings. Rin sat by the fire with Karu curled beside him like a shadow, and he carved wood into shapes with his knife. He shaped animals and faces, and once he made a figure of Karu, small and proud. He placed it on the shelf beside the others and looked at it for a long time. The days passed and Karu grew faster than Rin expected. Its limbs became steady, its body filled with strength, and its movements held purpose. It followed Rin when he walked and stopped when Rin did. It watched birds with silent focus and mimicked their cries. It listened to the wind and tilted its head when voices came near. Sometimes Lyra, the daughter of the tribe's chief, stood far off near the old tree that marked the edge of her world and watched Rin and Karu without saying a word. She had never spoken to him, and he had never dared speak to her. But he saw her eyes full of questions, and he saw the way she looked at Karu, not with fear, with wonder. One evening, the tribe gathered for the moon feast, and Rin, as usual, was not invited. He stayed near his hut and watched the fire glow from a distance while Karu lay beside him, still and alert. Music floated on the wind and laughter echoed through the night, but Rin stayed quiet as always. A group of young hunters passed near his hut and saw Karu sitting by the door. They shouted and mocked, saying it was a waste of food and time to keep a creature that could not hunt or serve. One of them threw a stick and it struck near Karu's head. In a blink, Karu stood between Rin and the boys, his body low and his eyes glowing with strange light. He did not growl and he did not leap, but the hunters froze. Something in Karu's posture made them step back, not fear, something deeper, uncertainty. Left in silence, and Rin placed his hand on Karoo's back, feeling the calm power beneath his skin. That night Rin did not sleep. He stared at the stars and thought of what Karoo might become. He did not want power, and he did not seek revenge, but something was changing. Karoo was not just a creature. He was becoming something else, something more and deep inside. Rin felt a shift in his own heart, not pride, responsibility. Looked at Karoo resting under the soft light of the stars, and for the first time, he whispered, "You are not a pet, you are a promise." The change began. Morning came slow and golden as the sun lifted itself from behind the rocky hills and poured its warmth across the land like a soft blanket of fire. Rin stood outside his hut with his eyes half closed and his hand resting gently on Karoo's back as they watched the horizon breathe with light. Karoo sat without sound, without twitch, without fear, and his gaze moved like a blade across every stone and shadow. His body had grown longer and stronger, and the thin skin, once torn and pale, now shimmered with a strange smooth shine. Muscles had formed beneath the surface, like coiled ropes ready to strike, but Karoo never moved without reason. Rin trained him not with whips or hunger, but with food and voice and touch. Every signal, every sound, every gesture had meaning. Karoo learned faster than any beast Rin had seen or heard of. He followed hand signs, he obeyed quiet commands, and he could move through grass without a single leaf shaking. Rin knew something rare was happening, but he kept silent and careful because the tribe still watched from a distance, and the fear in their eyes was slowly rising. Each morning, Rin walked into the valley, and Karoo walked beside him with a step so smooth, it was like wind over stone. They hunted small things at first, like lizards and birds. Karoo never killed for fun and never wasted a single bite. He used claws with clean strikes and teeth with purpose. Rin never told him how to do it, he just did. Word spread among the villagers. They said the creature was not natural. Some said it was cursed. Others said it had ancient blood. Some whispered it was sent by the sky to test the tribe's strength. But no one came near Rin's hut, and no one dared challenge Karoo with more than words. Lyra still watched from the distance. Some days she stood alone under the old tree with her arms crossed and her eyes fixed on Karoo as if searching for something she had lost. Once she approached Rin as he gathered wood and spoke without fear. She asked what Karoo ate. She asked if it could speak. Rin answered with quiet truth and calm tone. Karoo eats what he earns. Karoo speaks without voice. Lyra smiled without sound and left without warning. One night a storm rolled across the hills with heavy clouds and dry wind, and lightning cracked above the mountains like broken teeth in a black mouth. The tribe huddled in their homes, and the children cried as the wind screamed against the wooden walls. Rin stayed outside under the small shelter of his roof, with Karoo sitting still beside him like a statue made of dark flame. When the storm passed and the sun returned the next morning, Rin walked to the edge of the forest to collect fallen branches. He heard a cry, not a human cry, a desperate animal sound coming from the trees. He followed it and found a young desert stalker, trapped beneath a fallen tree, its leg broken and its mouth foaming with panic. Rin stepped closer with caution. But before he could act, Karoo leapt forward in silence. In one swift motion, Karoo ended the creature's suffering with a clean strike and stood back. Rin stared, not in shock, but in silence. Karoo had not killed in rage, he had ended pain with mercy. By the time they returned to the village, several hunters had seen the act from a distance. They told the elders they had witnessed something strange. A beast that moved like it understood pain. A creature that killed with judgment, not hunger. The council gathered in secret and spoke in low voices. Some feared Karoo might be too smart. Others saw opportunity. One elder whispered that such power should not sit in the hands of an outsider. Rin noticed the change in the air. More eyes followed him when he passed. More voices lowered when he neared. The silence became heavy. The greetings became fewer. One afternoon, the tribe faced a sudden danger. A pack of raiders from the outer sand came riding fast with sharp blades and wild eyes, and they broke through the border. Guards, before anyone could send a full alarm, chaos fell on the village as men grabbed weapons and women ran for shelter. Rin was outside the walls with Karoo walking through the dry stream bed. When he heard the first screams, he looked down at Karoo. Karoo looked back. No words, only motion. Together they ran, not with panic but with purpose. They reached the village's edge as a raider tried to pull a child from a shelter. Before the man could strike, Karoo lunged with such speed, the air seemed to bend. In 3 moves, the raider fell unconscious with no blood and no breath wasted. Rin and Karoo moved from house to house, not with rage, but with skill. Karoo struck only those who attacked Rin, guided with signs and signals. The raiders scattered within minutes. The villagers watched in stunned silence as Karoo stood at the center of the square with dust rising around his feet and eyes like glowing firestone as snow. One cheered, no one spoke. They simply stared. Later that night the elders met again. They no longer whispered, they debated. One said the creature had saved lives. Another said the creature had stolen their pride. Lyra came to Rin in the dark carrying water and herbs. She did not speak at first. Then she asked, "Will he turn on us one day?" Rin shook his head with slow movement. "Not unless you try to cage him." Lyra sat near the fire and watched Karoo sleep, curled in a circle like a cat made of armor and shadow. She reached out a hand and paused. Rin nodded. She touched Karoo's head gently. Karoo opened one eye and closed it again. Lyra smiled without words, then said something soft. "He is not just a beast, he is becoming a mirror." Rin looked at the flames and whispered more to himself than her. "Then what does that make me? The power are revealed." Days after the raid passed slow and quiet, like the heavy silence after a storm that left no damage but changed the air forever. The tribe walked with softer steps and spoke in lower voices, as if something unseen now listened from the shadows. The people still lived and breathed and worked as before, but something had shifted. Deep in their hearts, a mixture of fear and awe had taken root, like a seed waiting to grow into something they did not yet understand. Karoo no longer looked like a creature that belonged to the desert. His body stood taller now, his back wide and steady, his legs strong enough to leap over the thorn fences that once kept out wild beasts. His skin had grown harder and darker, like stone soaked in shadow, but it was not just his shape that changed. His eyes now held layers of thought and memory. He watched people not like an animal watches food or threat. He watched like one who listens and remembers and understands what others try to hide. Rin felt it every morning when Karoo sat beside him as they ate under the pale sky. He felt the deep bond between them, growing stronger, without words, without touch, just silent. Knowing when he moved, Karoo moved. When he hesitated, Karoo waited. They had become something more than a boy and his beast. They had become a single rhythm, a shared breath. The people of the village started coming in small groups, standing far from Rin's hut, asking questions with half-bowed heads and eyes full of caution. They wanted to know how Karoo had learned to fight, how he knew where to strike, how he could track without scent and see in the dark. Rin gave no answers. He only said Karoo was raised with care and treated with respect. He did not tell them the full truth, that Karoo was not only smart, he was learning faster than any living thing should. And not just learning, he was adapting. One morning, a group of young warriors came to test themselves. They asked Rin if Karoo would face them not in real battle, but in trial of skill. Rin said no at first, but they insisted, and their voices carried through the village. The crowd gathered at the old field where challenges were held during harvest season. Rin stood at the center with Karoo beside him. 4 warriors stepped forward, proud and sure of their strength. Each carried a wooden staff and wore training armor. The challenge was simple: touch Karoo. Without being touched, the signal was given. And the warriors moved fast and sharp with steps trained from childhood. But Karoo did not dodge. He flowed, he shifted like smoke and struck with grace. Not once did he hurt them, but each time a staff came close, Karoo tapped the attacker first. Fight ended in moments. None of them touched Karoo even once. The crowd clapped softly, not with joy but with confusion. They had seen skill beyond what should be possible. And now they looked at Rin with new eyes. Not all were impressed. The brother of the tribe's strongest warrior stood among the watchers with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. He saw not wonder but danger. He saw not strength but a threat to the tribe's honor. That night he called for a meeting of the elders and spoke with fire in his voice. He said the outsider had brought a weapon into their home. He said this creature was not a pet and not a protector. He said one day Karoo would choose to rise above his master, and none would be able to stop him. Some elders agreed. Others reminded him that Karoo had saved the children during the raid. But fear once planted does not fade with reason. It waits, it feeds, it grows. The next evening, Rin returned from gathering herbs and found a mark burned into the side of his hut. A warning not from the elders but from those who believed they were defending the old ways. Karoo sniffed the mark and walked around the hut 3 times before sitting beside Rin with his body low and ready. Rin did not speak. He knew what it meant. They would not attack in the open. They would wait for a moment to strike when no one would watch, when no one would defend. Only one who dared come that night was Lyra. She brought food and a fresh cloth for Karoo and sat without asking for permission. She looked tired, her eyes heavy with thoughts she could not share even with Rin. She asked him why he stayed, why he did not leave with Karoo and find a place where they would not be feared. Rin looked at the fire and answered not with anger, but with steady voice, because running teaches them they are right to fear what they do not understand. Lyra did not argue. She placed her hand on Karoo's head and closed her eyes for a moment. Then she whispered, "They will try to take him from you." Rin nodded once and whispered back, "They will fail." The next dawn came with a strange silence. No birds, no footsteps, no voices. Only the wind. Rin stood outside and felt the air heavy with waiting. He knew something would happen, but he did not know when. Just before noon, a cry came from the east side of the village. Smoke followed. A shelter had caught fire. People rushed to help. The warriors moved toward the flames. In that moment, Rin knew the fire was a trick, a distraction. He turned toward his hut. 3 men moved through the tall grass with covered faces and quiet feet. Each held a net and a spear. They did not see Karoo until it was too late. From behind the hut, Karoo came like a shadow flying. He did not roar. He did not snarl. He struck with silence and perfect aim. In seconds, the men fell to the ground one after the other, without blood, without breath, without sound. The village returned to find the men tied at the center square, with Karoo standing above them like a guardian carved from black stone. The elders gathered and said nothing. The people said nothing. Lyra came forward and said only one thing: he did not kill them. He protected them. Rin stood beside Karoo and looked across the crowd. He did not ask for thanks. He did not speak of revenge. He only said one truth: Karoo is not your threat, but he can be your shield if you learn to see. And for the first time no one argued. Fall of Pride. The air above the village felt different, as if something heavy now pressed against the sky, as if the ground itself held its breath. Days passed since Karoo stopped the silent attack, and since the 3 masked men were caught in front of the whole tribe, but no one came forward to claim the act, and no one admitted sending them. They remained silent, and shame filled their eyes, though their mouths stayed shut like locked doors. The elders released them after 3 nights with a warning, not with justice, not with truth, only silence and old fear. Guiding their decision, Rin returned to his hut without anger, and Karoo followed as always his movements. Smooth, his steps light like wind brushing across water. But now more eyes followed them, and more hands rested on weapons when they passed. Tribe no longer mocked and no longer laughed, but respect without trust is a blade without a handle. It cuts both ways. Lyra came more often now, and her visits no longer held the secrecy of stolen moments. She walked with open steps and carried fruit and herbs and sometimes cloths she stitched with her own hands. She never said why she came, and Rin never asked. They shared fire and food in silence that held more meaning than speech. She spoke of the tribe, of her father's struggle to hold peace, of the old customs that bound her hands and her future. Rin listened with quiet eyes and answered with soft words. Not advice, not commands, only presence. One night the stars hid behind clouds, and the wind carried a strange chill that touched bone and soul. Rin sat outside with Karoo resting beside him, and Lyra standing near the fence with her arms wrapped around herself. She asked if he had ever known fear, not the fear of pain or death, but the fear of becoming something others cannot. Except Rin looked toward the hills and then at Karoo. He said, "Fear walks beside those who choose to stand apart. It whispers, but it also teaches that." Same night a message arrived carried by a young scout sent from the western tribes. They requested aid to defend against sand raiders that had begun to attack smaller settlements. The elders gathered and agreed to send a group of warriors. The rival leader, the brother of the strongest warrior, demanded command of the group. He spoke loud with pride and anger, claiming that his strength would bring honor to the tribe. But Lyra stepped forward, and for the first time in the circle of elders, she raised her voice against the old customs. She said Rin and Karoo had faced greater threats and proven their worth, and she asked that Rin be sent as part of the group. Gasps filled the room, and the rival leader laughed not with joy but with disbelief. He mocked Rin, called him an outsider, a man with no clan, no blood, no standing. He said Karoo was a beast, not a soldier, and that trusting them was the same as surrender. Rin stood quiet while the debate echoed around him, and Karoo sat beside him, unmoving like a shadow of thought. Finally the chief, Lyra's father, raised his hand and said, "Let the trial of choice decide." Each man would lead a group through the hills and return with proof of strength and wisdom, and the tribe would choose based on truth, not talk. Rin accepted without pride. The rival leader accepted with a smile that did not reach his eyes. They left the next morning with their chosen warriors, heading in different directions across the rocky lands. Rin took only Karoo and two silent hunters who had once mocked him, but now followed him with quiet steps. Their path was hard with no shelter and little water, and Rin led them not with orders but with patience. He read the signs in the sand, in the broken twigs, and the shifted stones. Karoo moved ahead, watching, listening, guiding. They found the trail of raiders near the edge of the dry river and followed it for 3 days without sleep. On the 4th day, they came upon a small camp. Raider scouts guarded the edge. Rin waited until night and then moved like breath through the rocks. Karoo followed without sound, and the two hunters watched with wide eyes as Karoo slipped past the guards. Like a whisper carried by wind, one by one, the scouts vanished, not killed, taken and tied and left in silence. They returned to the village with proof maps taken from the raiders' weapons marked with stolen blood, and 4 scouts tied with ropes of desert vine. Rival group returned late and broken with 2 men missing and no trophies. Their leader claimed he was ambushed and blamed Rin for leading the raiders toward them. The elders listened, but their eyes saw the truth. The people saw too. That evening, the chief stood before the tribe and declared Rin the chosen one to lead the next defense. But before he could finish, the rival leader stepped forward with eyes full of rage. He shouted that the tribe was falling under the spell of an outsider and his beast. He demanded a final trial, not of skill, of dominance. He called for combat, not against Rin, against Karoo. The crowd froze. Rin stepped forward and said, "Karoo does not fight for gains and pride." But the rival leader only laughed and said, "If Karoo is not beast, then he should speak. And if he is beast, then he must prove himself by their laws." Lyra begged her father to stop it, but the chief said the laws are older than voices and must be honored. Rin looked at Karoo. Karoo looked at Rin. No words, only silence. The next morning the arena was filled, not with joy, with fear. The rival leader entered with a staff carved from ironwood and armor made from the shell of a mountain beast. Karoo entered without armor, without weapon, without roar, only stillness. The fight began and the rival charged with speed and fury. Karoo stepped aside once, twice, then moved. He did not strike to kill. He did not strike to wound. He moved with precision, with purpose. The rival leader fell not from pain but from loss of balance. Karoo placed a single claw against his throat and held it there until the chief raised his hand. Silence broke and became thunder. The tribe saw not a beast, not a pet, They saw power with restraint, strength with purpose, a guardian, not a monster. Lyra walked into the arena and stood before Rin. She did not speak, she knelt, not in fear, in choice, and in that moment, the pride of the tribe broke, not in shame. In rebirth to crownless Alpika, sun rose behind the hills like a slow flame pushing away the night and lighting the world with a quiet gold that touched every rooftop and every face in the tribe. The village stood in a hush, not of fear and not of confusion, but something new, something calm that came after storms had passed and old walls had fallen inside the hearts of proud people. No one spoke loud, and no one walked with heavy steps, as if the earth itself asked for stillness before the day could begin. Rin stood beside the river, washing his hands in the cold water, while Karoo stood behind him like a dark reflection made from muscle and mind. Lyra watched from a distance, her eyes following every move as if she could read a future written not in stars, but in the quiet rhythm of man and beast. The trial had ended, and the crowd had seen more than victory. They had seen mercy given by something stronger than any warrior, something that could have broken bones and spilled blood but chose to show control. They had seen Karoo pause with his claw on a neck and wait for permission, not because he was weak, but because he understood limits. They had seen Rin stand tall, not because he won, but because he never wanted to win by fear. He only wanted to live in truth. That morning the chief called for the full gathering, and every soul came from the far edges of the land. Old men with long memories, young warriors with restless pride, children with wide eyes and open minds. All stood in the great square, waiting for what would be spoken. Rin walked into the center alone, and Karoo followed with slow, quiet steps. The chief stood, and his voice rose steady, without anger and without shame. He said the tribe had seen what they once could not accept, that honor was not always in blood, that wisdom sometimes lived outside the old circle, that strength without kindness led only to ruin. He turned to Rin and said no outsider had ever been given a place in their council. No creature had ever stood as more than beast, but this moment was no longer bound by what had been. It was shaped by what must now begin. He offered Rin a seat at the council, not as warrior, not as leader, but as voice of the new. He offered Karoo the title of protector of the tribe with the mark of sacred bond, and he asked Lyra if she still stood by her choice. She stepped forward without pause and placed her hand in Rin's without words. The people saw, and the silence was filled with something deeper than approval. It was respect born from truth, not force. Rin looked at the chief and then at the people and said he did not come for titles or place or power. He came with nothing. He found something. He said if they wanted him to stay, it would not be as ruler, a voice above others. It would be as a keeper of balance, a watcher of paths, a man with a beast that had become his brother. He asked one thing only, that the tribe write a new law, a law that no bonded creature could be harmed or caged for being different, that no voice be silenced for coming from outside the circle, that protection be given to those who choose peace over pride. The chief agreed, and the elders nodded. The law was spoken. The people listened. Change began not with fire, but with choice. Karoo stood beside Rin in the days that followed, not as a weapon, and not as a warning, but as a sign, a living memory of what can grow from care and courage. He walked the village with calm eyes, and children began to follow him. They placed stones before him and laughed when he stepped around them. They left food at Rin's door and asked stories about the day. Karoo flew through the wind and stopped the raiders with only his eyes. Lyra took her place beside Rin, not as prize, not as symbol, but as equal. She helped write the new code. She taught the young the value of patience. She walked into the forest with Rin and gathered herbs while Karoo watched from the cliffs like a sentinel made from shadow and trust. Rival leader who once called for Rin's exile did not return to speak again. He left the village and his name faded with time. Others took his place, but not with pride. With humility, the tribe changed slowly, as all true change must. Walls came down, new shelters rose. Old songs were sung in new voices. Years passed and stories grew. They spoke of the outsider who raised a broken creature into a guardian, They spoke of the girl who gave up her crown to walk beside truth. They spoke of a beast who never roared, but whose silence broke the strongest chains. Rin never wore robes of honor. He never sat on a throne. He built a school near the river, taught how to read the wind, how to hear the earth, how to respect what others fear. Karoo grew older and stronger, but never wild. He stayed by Rin's side like a silent fire that warmed, but never burned. Some said he could speak through eyes, others said he dreamed of skies beyond stars. No one knew, but all believed. And when the stars shone above the valley at night, and the wind carried the scent of the forest through the village, and the fire crackled near the huts, children would ask again and again, "Tell us the story of the boy, the beast, and the day the tribe changed." The old ones would say, "It began with a creature left to die. It grew with a bond stronger than blood. It ended with no crown, no throne, only a choice that made the world new." The end